This is actually the favorite part of the program each year, because occasionally you come across people in America who are so committed to improving their communities and their country that they're ubiquitous. They're literally everywhere. You can't imagine or connect to a civic engagement initiative that they aren't a part of. When I think of this year's two recipients of the Joseph H. Canner Citizen of the Year Award, I think of citizenship on steroids. Literally, not just the two of them, but how they've used their entrepreneurial spirit and their business acumen and sense to enable millions of Americans and organizations to connect to citizenship. I want to tell just two brief stories. We just had the 10th anniversary of 9/11. And after emerging from a bunker below the White House and wondering every day when I came into work whether what our country would be like, this CEO comes into the White House to see us, named Steve Case. And Steve says, you know, this is a moment in the life of the country, and we want to do our part to foster a culture of service and citizenship. And, you know, you don't need a PR campaign. What are the institutional changes that America's corporations could make all across this country to keep the spirit of unity and patriotism and service alive? And he said, what you need is a CEO to CEO campaign, where CEOs call other CEOs and say, what are the board approved or other institutional changes in your corporation that you can make in policy and practice that would ignite your workforce, show the power, you know, on recruitment and retention, and so that this period of time will forever foster a culture of service. And then he loaned through his company an employee full-time who organized 1,000 corporations who were competing. A lot of them were competing in the marketplace, but joined hands to build Habitat homes together, mentor and tutor disadvantaged children, build playgrounds together. And one company gave 82,000 employees 6 days of paid leave to mobilize their workforce to mentor and tutor children in disadvantaged schools, and I could give many other examples. Then about a month later, this other extraordinary woman, Jean Case, with whom we were very familiar because of her reach and power and influence and her ideas in the nonprofit sector, was tapped to be initially on the council and then chair the President's Council on Service and Civic Participation, a wonderful group of Americans. You'd recognize most of their names. Remember Sean Astin from Lord of the Rings, Cal Ripken, Cokie Roberts, Bob Putnam, lots of wonderful people. And Jean said, you know, this isn't just going to be an honorary council. And she, working with the council, led the effort to create $1 billion in change, which literally mobilized $500 million in pro bono service from organizations that were equipped to use their strategic and other expertise to help nonprofits respond to this infusion of volunteers. An extraordinary initiative. She also gave more than part of this effort to create the President's Volunteer Service Award, which has now given more than 2 million Americans presidential recognition that President Obama has continued to recognize them for their service and citizenship. And then was part of the Service Nation effort that led to what Harris loves to call the quantum leap in national community service. I just want to say that without Steve and Jean Case, the National Conference on Citizenship never would have had its renaissance. They believed in the idea. They loved its history. They loved that it was congressionally chartered. And they loved the collection of wonderful people across America that were emerging to breathe life into it. But they also pushed us, and they said, well how are you going to become the organization that defines and advances modern citizenship in America? And out of that conversation came America's Civic Health Index, which tracks indicators of civic health all across the country and now provides communities the power of information to help drive and affect change. And tomorrow we have a very exciting new wrinkle on that, which is the relationship between civic health and economic resilience, which, boy, if these trends continue, really could spark a big boom to civic life. So Before we give the award, I want to say that not only are they Citizen of the Year, literally they are Citizens of the Decade. They have, over the past decade, in my view, done more to advance civic engagement in America than any two individuals I can think of. There is a Citizen of the Century. He was our first Citizen of the Year. It's not a comment on his age. It's a comment on his just wonderful energy and ideas. So, Harris, you wanted to offer some remarks as well.
John, it's my lucky part to join you in doing what a lot of people in this room would like to do, to tell Gene Case and Steve Case what we think about them. Now, this room is full of good citizens. Following the watchword, we've got to be more inventive if we're going to do our duty. Social innovation. Around here, I particularly our host, David Eisner, a great leader of national service and many other things before he came to the Constitution Center. This is a room full of people who appreciate not only John Adams's comment that the highest office in the land is that of citizen, but also his comment and Jefferson's that by the pursuit of happiness of the Declaration of Independence, they meant above all the happiness of participating in your self-government. So just on one simple point of two people who are in the front ranks of those who have shown what a good public citizen is and can be. Now, I want to go one step further and act as a surrogate for Mahatma Gandhi. He would be. People don't usually see how often he smiled. His son told Claire and me in 1949 that people don't realize my father's greatest power was he had the best laugh in the world. He would be very happy because one of his disappointments was that one of his main platforms, one of his main pitches that he spent a lot of time on from South Africa through India, through the very last hours of his life, living on the floor of the richest man in India, was his concept that those of great wealth or command access to great wealth need to see themselves as trustees of the poor. And he made it very clear he didn't mean just the poor in material things, but the poor in spirit, in education, in the things that Gandhi would have ultimately said was the most important of the spirit. He had three dimensions of self-government. One was constructive service, which he called on all Indians to do. Second was civil disobedience and protest and action to stop things that were wrong, whether in government or in other parts of society. And third, the vote. At all levels, participate in whatever the level of government is, including the level of great corporations. But he had a special niche for those, his great friends, of the greatest wealth. And he said, you must be trustees for the poor. And the last conversation he had before he was shot was with Margaret Bourke-White, and she said, are they doing what you've asked? And you're sitting in the home of one of the richest men in India. And Gandhi said, he tells me he is, he's trying. And she tried to pry whether they were doing enough. And he said, the real struggle is within each of us, not what other people are doing. And you and Steve deserve the Mahatma Gandhi Award for service and great citizenship. Thanks. So here.
Keep clapping, it'd be okay.
One more. Right at the
Now I want to welcome to the stage someone who covers for the New York Times, is the national correspondent for the New York Times, and covers civic engagement issues. And I just have to tell one quick story about Stephanie. She once called me on a story, and I asked her a question, and she said, I've checked with 15 sources. Never had a reporter who's been so extensive in the research. And please welcome Stephanie to coordinate a civic discussion with our recipients of the Cantor Award.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's been really my great pleasure to get to know both Steve and Jean. I know Steve more from Twitter and Jean more from talking on the phone, but that's just two different methods of communication, two different methods of engagement, and they really are stand out in the world of philanthropy for their willingness to stand up and say things and talk about things and have a discussion. So I thought, one question that I've never asked the two of you is what got you started and made you ultimately decide to focus your philanthropy and your business really on civic engagement? What was sort of the catalyst for that?
Can you start?
Sure. Well, if I can start just by first thanking Harris and John. I'm sorry we can't come out of a talk like that and let it go unacknowledged. Thank you, Harris and John, for those unbelievable words. And David Smith and Michael Weiser from NCOC and David Eisner at the Constitution Center, thanks for making today happen. And probably what got us started is what a lot of us are feeling as we're here today and listening to some of the conversations. And even as we sit in this space where we recognize the Constitution and the founding and we put our focus on citizenship, I think the idea that civic engagement strengthens communities is a really powerful idea. And I think we had come out of technology and we had seen firsthand the empowering nature of technology as it relates to communities and individuals coming together, bringing people together, et cetera. And so I think in many ways it was almost a continuation, if you will, of some of the work that we had both been involved in our careers as we looked to interactive services to tie bonds of people and communities together. And I think we wanted to do that in a more sort of purposeful way through the work of our foundation.
Yeah, it was a little bit circuitous, as these things often are, as you explore different things and try different things. But before I comment, I should also echo what Jean said. The remarks were really terrific. I actually thought you had to die to have people say nice things like that. I kept thinking, like, am I dead or? So it's nice to hear great things when you're alive. Anyway,
let's do that again.
When we got passionate, both of us, about what's now become the internet, obviously, but in the early 1980s was really kind of online service, interactive TV. It was really the beginnings of the birth of a new medium. We really believed that the core of it was people. We called it community. Now it's called social media, but we said the core, the killer app, if you will, was community. And we kind of met some competitors at the time focused on commerce, some people focused on content. We said the focus really is on community, and the whole focus with things like chat rooms and instant messaging and so forth that we did from the 1985 when we got started, really for the last couple decades, that people were at the center of it. So as AOL got more successful, we said, let's start a foundation. We created the AOL Foundation. Then we shortly thereafter created the Case Foundation. And it wasn't that surprising that we embraced some of those original ideas. That the key was about people and building that sense of community, rather than doing it digitally in the virtual world. How do you take some of those skills and apply it more broadly? And the other key lesson from what we were doing was the success of AOL really was driven by partnerships. It really was a tapestry of alliances, lots of different companies that worked together to create this, create AOL and create the internet more broadly, and applying some of that same approach to partnership in the civic sector, and really almost a networked approach to philanthropy, was also sort of a natural kind of outgrowth of some of those early insights, passions, focus we had really 25 plus years ago.
Yeah, and I would add, what Steve said is exactly right. Some of those AOL lessons really transferred to what we're doing now. another lesson was really a cross-sector lesson, because we did start the AOL Foundation, and actually David Eisner, who runs the Constitution Center, worked with us at AOL at that time and was part of taking the AOL Foundation forward. But what we also saw was the power of cross-sector collaboration. So not just partnership, with people sort of in our own sector, in our own little silo, but really reaching out and saying, how can the public sector work together, the private sector work together? How can we engage nonprofits? How can foundations and funders play a role in that as well? And we saw, because we were involved in some early initiatives even from the corporate side, that informed then, I think, how we wanted to take our philanthropy forward as we created our own personal foundation.
That's great. Did you find that people, when you first started talking about civic engagement, thought this means volunteering, like taking myself and going to build a house, or taking myself and going to a soup kitchen or something, instead of, I think you all are talking about it in a much more modern way, a contemporary way, where people think of community as you don't necessarily have to see the person and they don't have to be physically there to participate.
Like us on Twitter.
Right, exactly.
Like you two, I'll get out of the way. No, I think that's right. But, Twitter really sort of isn't a joke, because, we've really pivoted. We want an active and engaged citizenry. We want civic engagement. But guess what? If tools are transforming and we don't have a trained citizenry, or a trained nonprofit sector, or a trained public sector to be at the front end of these things, they're going to get left behind. So it's really interesting, because here we are as a foundation, but how we've spent a tremendous amount of the last couple of years is really in building some of these tools and trainings for nonprofits. And even last fall, we hosted, together with the White House, it was terribly humbling, a summit on innovation. And the whole idea there was, how do we take some of these new technology tools and really engage citizens in the process in a whole new way? And we had 35 federal agencies there. It was a really great day. So we don't just care about citizens. We care about making sure that people are empowered with the tools and the ability to be engaged. And some of that then puts us in this role that we really didn't expect to find ourselves, which is really spending a lot of time and attention trying to bring resources to people and organizations.
And the other bridge there is and John Bridgeland said there'll be a report tomorrow on this, is how you connect what's happening in the civic society with what's happening economically, and recognizing there's more and more links there than people fully appreciate. It starts with, obviously a key focus is driving entrepreneurship. It starts with companies forming and growing and having success, and then that in of itself has positive spin-offs in the community in terms of the jobs it creates and other things. But there's also has the ability, like we did with AOL, get to a certain size, has the ability to do things more directly, philanthropically. So getting these businesses to recognize they have a responsibility to create great products and services that really can change people's lives and create a successful, profitable business, but they also have a broader responsibility in getting communities to recognize they really are, the pillars of the community. When they're successful businesses, take Detroit for example. 50 years ago, it was thriving because the industry, particularly the car companies in Detroit, were thriving. Now it's struggling because those companies have retrenched. So the linkages between these things are much tighter than most people think of. And thinking of them as sort of independent worlds, independent silos, I think is a mistake. It's how do you build bridges between them? And all of our work is really about kind of trying to build those kind of bridges and not just focus on this is a business or this is a nonprofit or this is a government policy kind of thing. How do you blur the lines as much as you can, because that's where you get the real synergy and leverage.
Can you talk to us about some of the things that you've done using some of these tools to stimulate civic engagement?
Sure.
I know, of course, I know about them, but
I was going to say, you were kind enough, I think, to put a spotlight on some of our work in prizes and challenges, for instance, which I think many of you may know. We did America's Giving Challenge twice. Our partners there were Facebook Causes and Parade Magazine, chosen really on purpose. Facebook Causes was very leading edge, people who were ahead of the curve, early adopters to social media. Parade Magazine, we knew many of their readers had actually never given online before. And the concept of it was, as these new media opportunities and new sort of technology innovations were coming about and becoming tools for consumers, how can we do some early experimentation to make sure that they're used for good and can maybe make some great things happen by democratizing philanthropy? We have, hundreds of millions of Americans out there. The vast majority of them give the vast majority of what's given every year, but there's still a lot left that people can do. And so what this enabled was people to champion for causes that they believed in. And whoever got the most number of donations actually then won some prize money. And it was a great early experiment. We did the first one, I think, in 2009, something like that, maybe even earlier, 2007, and the second one in 2009. And we've published results. So together, we got about 200,000 Americans donating to causes they cared about. But it really was never about those donations. It was really about, you know, letting the nonprofits ready themselves to be out there in social media and to get direct donations from consumers. It was about consumers being exposed to great ideas and great organizations they never knew existed before the challenge went forward. But in the end, we had about 200,000 people donate. About $4 million was raised out of them. But again, I will never look at the $4 million as that was the value of those campaigns. I think in working with nonprofits, we've heard a lot of them say that really readied them for the social media wave. And that was a big part of the goal going into it.
And the other piece of this is, in our role, we have some business activities under this Revolution umbrella. We have a Case Foundation. But we also recognize there are opportunities to bridge things in the middle. And we've made some investments in companies that have a civic purpose. Mission Fish, which now is part of eBay, for example, or Network for Good, or Facebook Causes, where we gave them a little bit of money, a few $1 million in terms of investments, but they've been able to leverage that and build platforms that now probably approaching $700–800 million of donations. Yeah. So it's a highly leveraged way to invest in technology and platform and partnerships, such as what was done with eBay or with Facebook, and really magnify and leverage our investments. So looking for ways to do that. And I also should say that the mission for Revolution, the mission for Case Foundation is the same. Mm-hmm. We invest in people and ideas that can change the world.
And tell them what Revolution is.
Sometimes we think it's best done through the prism of launching businesses, entrepreneurial businesses that can scale and have impact. Sometimes it's through foundations. So Revolution, to give you a couple examples of the kinds of things we've gotten involved in the last few years. One is a company called Zipcar, which is really trying to really revolutionize urban living, and it's crazy for both economic reasons and environmental reasons.
You got claps. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Own cars, particularly in cities. So the company's public company now, but has in 20 major cities and 250 college campuses, and it's just a better way to provide a transportation option that's convenient. And it's really only possible because of the ubiquity of the internet and the mobility of the internet. You have a smartphone, you can be walking down the street, say, I think I need a car in like 20 minutes, and find a car 2 blocks away and go up to it and drive away. So that is a business. It's a for-profit company. It's now, as I said, a public company, but it has a public purpose, which it really believes that urban living and transportation should be revolutionized, and we've done that through the prism of investing in that company. Or more recently, a company in the social commerce space called Living Social that's really trying to kind of level the playing field between local merchants and national brands, and give these local merchants a chance to compete and build an audience in their communities, and gives consumers great deals, but also reasons to kind of get out of the house and away from the computer, be in their community with their friends and family, doing interesting kinds of things. So that again, it's a business, and it's focused on how do you invest this amount of money and have it someday be worth a lot more money, which we then can invest in other kinds of ways. But they also have this underlying kind of social purpose, and that's, I think, what makes them interesting. We're just not that interested in just investing in businesses that don't really have an impact in the world, and particularly an impact in consumers. We're really looking for businesses that can change and improve the way people get information or communicate or what have you, really fundamental aspects of their lives.
What happened with that? There was a deal on Living Social with Whole Foods. What ultimately happened?
That was amazing. You should tell me what the deal is.
Basically, at the core of this, there's several parts of Living Social, and one part is what's called a daily deals business. There's also some other verticals and some instant location-based deals. But in the daily deals business, I think it was Tuesday, they offered a deal with Whole Foods where basically you get a $20 gift certificate at Whole Foods for $10, which is a pretty good deal. We sold 1 million of those gift certificates. I think they had to shut it down at like 6 p.m.
Within like within hours, right?
We'd agreed with Whole Foods to limit it at 1 million, but they ended up moving more quick. So 1 million people all around the country, and whatever it was, 16 hours or 18 hours, became aware of this. Also, partly through the emails we send, but virally. It spread like wildfire on Facebook and Twitter and so forth, and was able to participate in that kind of deal. So the question is, how do you take some of those technologies and apply them not just to discount at Whole Foods, but other kind of social purposes?
That's right. What was the biggest thing that you've learned yourselves out of some of these, like the Giving Challenge and Mayo and things like that?
Yeah, I think there's a real thirst and a desire on the part of Americans to play a role. And if we can leverage these new technologies, and particularly some of the new social media platforms, to give them more opportunities, really great things can come of that. John mentioned, I felt so privileged to be able to chair the President's Council on Service and Civic Participation. I will count it as one of the greatest experiences of my life. But I learned something really important, and it may seem obvious to you. It was not obvious to me. The number one reason people volunteer, because they're asked. It's kind of like, wait a minute, but it's true. And I came out of a marketing background. I knew that we had to ask people to try our product in order to get our products and services bought. It's a no-brainer when you're on the corporate side, but you jump over to the foundation, the public sector side, the nonprofit, and it's like a radical concept that you have to sort of advertise, if you will. So one of the great things about these platforms is they expose people and they ask people to get engaged, to get involved, to contribute. And I think, we'll see really good things come around if more of that goes forward.
Is there, because one of the things that I've been wondering a lot, there are a lot of platforms, causes on Facebook is one of them, that are set up to engage people. I sometimes wonder, though, if they have to do more push marketing, if you will, before people kind of realize they were. And I don't think Causes has that problem, but there are a lot of them that.
I think they do. But I think Mission Fish is a great thing to talk about on eBay, and it actually hits on a much broader point. The opportunity for businesses to engage, I think, is really dramatic. And at the Case Foundation, most of what we do is cross-sector. So we usually have either a corporate partner or a public sector partner or both. But we're really excited about the untapped potential in businesses sort of jumping on board, if you will. And we've seen this time and time again. And in the case of Mission Fish, those things are going to be sold on eBay anyway. It's just that the merchant gets to designate that something good happens when something's purchased. And we see these in our grocery stores, et cetera. And more consumers are becoming aware of, the products I buy, what happens when I spend $1? Does something good happen because I bought this product instead of that product? Tremendous power and potential there, and I think we're seeing more and more of this going forward, and it's a really good thing.
But the other piece of that is, I think, because of the internet in particular, but other things as well, the battle has really shifted, whether you're in business or running a nonprofit or whatever you're doing. The battle's now for attention. In a world that's cluttered with choices, the battle has shifted from attention. And this has been true in the entertainment business for a while. If you were a band in some club, how do you break through and get... There's a lot of great bands and a lot of great clubs. Actually, very few end up breaking through. It takes a while to break through, and a lot of it ends up being who you associate with, or your record label, who your producer is, and the credibility of the people associated with that really matter. In the movie business, similarly, somehow if Steven Spielberg somehow is involved in your movie, guess what? It's going to get more attention. You're going to get the right cast and get the right funding and so forth. So, but there are a lot of scripts, and so a lot of people are competing for that. It's now true with internet businesses. The good news, the barrier to entry to create business has gone down dramatically over the last 10 years. The bad news, as a result, everybody's creating businesses that are Me Too businesses, and therefore the question is who breaks through and really creates the momentum. And similarly, as the nature of your question, it's not enough to say I've got a website or I have a Facebook page or I have a Twitter feed or what have you. You have to figure out ways to break through the clutter, and a lot of that is creating news, the people associated with what you're doing, and the credibility and visibility and momentum that creates. So it really is a battle for attention. It's not just about showing up. You've got to figure out how to put up your hand and get people to call on you.
And is it therefore easier than for a nonprofit or an organization that's looking for volunteers because they don't have to break through that kind of clutter, that kind of competition? Or
well, going back to America's Giving Challenge, I mean, what that really leveraged there was what I would consider word of mouth marketing, where basically I could tell you about a great cause that I believe in and then ask you, will you contribute? At the time, it could be as little as $10. And we know that what our friends think and people we trust think, you know, really matter. And social media enables that, right? Which is, you know, let me tell you something good. And you see it in a non-intrusive way. I don't have to send you an email. It's going to come up on your news feed, and then you get to decide if the fact that I think it's great is something that's going to bring you to action.
I always think of that old, I'm dating myself here, that old Breck Girl commercial where, and she told someone, and she told someone, and she told someone, and suddenly, you know, that's the way it works.
Right, but the beautiful thing about social media that I think changed everything is before I would have had to call you or email you or ding you or bug you in some way. And now you just, you know, see it. You see the things that I'm involved in, and you can decide, is that good enough then for you to jump in?
And one thing that I think is a reason to be optimistic, even though it's a cluttered environment, is there's a real generational shift now, and people, particularly in their 20s, really live on the internet, particularly live on their phones, and essentially organize on the fly their lives in terms of where they're going to get together, meeting people here, or what have you, in a much more real-time way than was ever true before. And that's usually used to, let's meet after work at whatever, a bar or something like that, or let's go to see this movie or what have you. But it also is increasingly being used for some of the things you folks are all involved in, and people know that you care about a cause, and they know it. You know, this weekend you're going to go do something, and they actually see that at 9 o'clock Saturday morning you're actually going to do the thing. You say, well, maybe I'll join you, and I'll do that too. So the ability to create this dynamic, almost real-time momentum around ideas and causes, I think, is really unique and didn't exist 10 years ago. And I think the folks that kind of grew up with these digital tools, when they were, from the time they can remember, they had access to computers, internet, and so forth. This is just to them like water or air, and the tools are now so embedded in their lives they can use it in a broader way. The challenge for all of us is how do we engage them to use those tools for purposes we care about, not just the things that might currently be their focus.
Yeah, I have a 14-year-old, and she's already planning they're going to do a jeans drive at school, and she's already planning, for every morning that the box is there, I'm going to take my text list, because of course they don't use the phone and they don't use email, it's all text, and everybody on my text list is going to don't forget to bring your jeans to school, It's amazing.
You've trained her well.
Well,
maybe she's training you.
But I'm still trying to figure out how to use text, right?
But think about the three things Harris brought up, that Gandhi talked about, right? Think about that in the context of social media. Think about the Boston Tea Party being organized in today's world, for instance. So the opportunity to extend these tools in a new and meaningful way for civic engagement, not just volunteering, right? But, and we saw this in London, right, with the riots cleanup. That wasn't anything anybody organized. That was true citizen to citizen. We're going to come together on this. So I think there's a...
And the Arab Spring was...
The Arab Spring was a big part of that.
Basically the ability to topple dictators who've been in place for decades really was only possible when people had these tools to essentially quietly, sort of secretly, but quickly organize things on the fly. It's almost like creating flash mobs for good.
Yeah, definitely.
So talk a little bit, if you would, about why it's important for business to be engaged civically. Sure. And then after, start with that, and then I'll go on.
Okay. So, we've been involved extensively in working with businesses and trying to bring forward campaigns, and I have the true privilege of, I think Margaret Cody's here somewhere, there she is right there, working with the Committee to Encourage Corporate Philanthropy, who does this really prestigious awards every year to recognize businesses for what they're doing. But in the years working with businesses and with CEOs, and Steve may have a little bit of a different tilt on his answer to this, he talked about the new generation. We've done research around the millennial generation, et cetera. they're really a different group of folks. And, you know, they're going to look at the places they go to work and they buy products and services from, and they're going to say, what role do they have in the world? And are they, you know, are they an authentic sort of good guy, if you will? But CEOs, I think, realize that attracting and retaining best in class from this new generation really means you have to be socially active. You really, and you have to be authentic with it. It's not the kind of thing that you just issue a press release and, you know, you say you've done something. So I think there's a recognition that, you know, just what it means to be a corporate citizen today, it actually isn't new. I think, you know, when companies were getting started in the corporate sector, they recognized they had a social role. It's just kind of being reinvented again, if you will, in a whole new way. And I'm excited by it. As I said, corporations make up a very small amount of charitable giving each year, and there's tremendous opportunity for that to go up. And would that go up even in a challenged economy? Yes, it could. And why could it? Because you could make a business case that you retain and attract not just talent, but consumers to your products through some of those things that you do.
But there's two things that have evolved. I remember my first job out of college with Procter & Gamble, which was a great company in Cincinnati, and they did a lot of great things in Cincinnati. One's helpful to the folks in this room, and one challenging. The one that's challenging is these companies, as they grow and become more global, are less centered in a particular community. Procter & Gamble, of course, still in Cincinnati, of course, does some of the stuff in Cincinnati, but really is a global company and really has global operations, actually has to think about what they do globally. Comcast happened to be in Philadelphia 25 years ago. They did a lot of stuff in Philadelphia. I'm sure they do a lot of stuff in Philadelphia, but now they're a global company and they have to have a broader strategy. And that's just the reality as these companies grow and become more global, and they're going to shift, and it's sometimes frustrating if you really thought they were primarily focused on your particular community because they have a broader agenda, but that's the reality. The positive is I think there's been a fundamental, or the beginnings of a fundamental shift in terms of how business views this. And it's less saying that you have a certain level of success, you have a certain responsibility to give back. And I think the best example is in terms of really doing a great job is Target and their 5% that really ends, I think it's $3 million a week now. It's, you know, a significant amount of money, and they've really built that in 50 years ago when they're Dayton Hudson and, you know, had like 3 stores, but they've expanded. Now the impact is pretty significant. And that's great. They basically say the more profitable we are, the more we're going to give back. And it's terrific, and more companies doing that, and that's what the committee's trying to focus on, would be terrific. But the other thing that's happened more recently is companies recognizing that it shouldn't be a philanthropic effort off on the side. Right. It really should be integrated in their core business, and the core value proposition should have that purpose embedded in it. And there's tons of examples of this now. One that sort of gets a lot of attention is Tom's Shoes, where you get one and they give one away. That is part of what people are buying those shoes for. They're buying into the idea that Tom's a responsible company doing responsible things. I saw this week Patagonia has been a real leader in doing things in the environment and trading a lot of different organizations to try to mobilize companies to do more in that space. Basically ask their customers to buy less of their product. Right. They said our purpose is really to be kind of responsible company and a successful company and serve the needs of our customers, but also be a good corporate global citizen. And we are concerned about the environment. We're concerned about overconsumption, and we're concerned that people are buying stuff they don't need. So we'd ask you not to buy more than you need, which is a startling thing to say. Yeah. But as a result, it got a lot of attention, I think, for people who like Patagonia. Now they feel they may or may not buy more or less, but they feel better about Patagonia for actually saying, yeah, if you don't need another jacket, don't buy another jacket. Maybe the jacket you have is fine. So it's really embedded in. It's so intensely into their mission and their purpose. It was taken to that extreme. I think that's really the wave of companies that are now being created. I mentioned Zip Garden as an example. That really the core business really has a social purpose, trying to make their communities more successful. And oh, by the way, if they get to a certain level of success, in addition to that, they will carve out some of their profits. And instead of giving them to shareholders, they'll give them back in a philanthropic kind of way. But the main event will increasingly be what the company's doing through its core business, not on the kind of off on the side. And I think that's very exciting.
I agree, and I'm looking at Diane Melly as you're talking from IBM, because I think IBM is a great example of that. If you look at IBM's products and services today, you would be you'd be challenged to say, well, what is sort of social good they're doing out of the CSR side, and what's their main product line? Because they're using many of their main product lines to change the world. And it's just really, really exciting to see. And they've been extremely strategic on their foundation side, making sure that the things they're doing over there are really, you know, in sort of lockstep with the business units as well. So it's kind of like in my opinion, a well-oiled machine in terms of the way that company goes about practicing its corporate philanthropy.
And one story I'll tell, even though it's a competitor to Living Social, so I'm reluctant to give it. But Groupon, which has been one of the fastest growing companies, certainly in recent history, and gotten a lot of attention. What's not known by most people is it actually started with a social purpose. It was a company called The Point. And they really were trying to use this social technology to mobilize people to do things in their community or to, you know, petitions or what have you. And it actually didn't work. They tried it, it didn't quite work. It just wasn't getting traction, wasn't getting liftoff. But there was one little piece that they had tried which related to these coupons that seemed like it was working. So they said, well, why don't we do more of that? And now it's, you know, one of the fastest growing on with their current revenue, but certainly many billions of dollars of revenue. And it's only been probably 3 or 4 years since they had that insight and moved into that. So that's an example of, and now they are starting to do things that kind of take them back to some of their roots of some of the ideas they had in The Point, because they now built a platform with 100 million plus people and so forth. So they're kind of trying to integrate some of that. But it's interesting that it actually was a pivot from a company which was really founded around mobilizing civic engagement, really, and basically pivoted to basically be in more of a commerce daily deals, you know, business. But it really was the same technology that was transformed in that. So it just shows you the blurry lines between these things, and looking at them in a more integrated, holistic way is where a lot of leverage and synergy comes, but also a lot of insights.
It's fascinating. You sure it's not the cats and the horses and everything else he trots through the office?
Well, that's the last positive thing I'm going to say about Groupon.
Well, I'd love to take some questions from you all for Jean and Steve. Have you got? Is there a mic? You can yell. It's a small room. It's not.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to hear you.
Yeah.
We'll use a mic for the video. Thanks. I wanted to ask a question from Twitter. We asked, actually, the Case Foundation tweeted a question. Tweeted out.
Did we tweet the answer too? That'd be awesome.
Tell them to wait on the answer.
One of the most.
Why is Jean so smart?
Yeah.
Interesting question.
This question comes from the Common Knowledge Group in California.
Okay.
And it's directed to Steve, and they ask, have you used the collective impact model to accelerate cross-sector alignment? And then they make the comment that many funders inadvertently put organizations in competition.
Did you get the question?
I did. You start out now.
I would actually need you to repeat the question. I'm
Sure.
sorry.
Have you ever seen the collective impact model used to accelerate cross-sector alignment?
Well, I think the last part of the question, I think we absolutely have seen, which is the competition, and you all know this one, you know, the competition in the social sector is way more intense than anything in any other sector I've seen, with the possible exception these days of politics, which has gotten pretty competitive. The business world, of course, is competitive, and there's teasing about Groupon and Living Social, but the nonprofit world is much more competitive. And we have tried to, sometimes more successfully than others, build bridges and really do things in a more collaborative way, where we try to get organizations working together on a common purpose, as opposed to just doing one thing over here and one thing over here. And that's been particularly true in work we've done in the health area around brain cancer research. That it's a classic case where everybody's kind of, there's some great folks around the country who are doing, you know, great work at a variety of different institutions, but they're kind of doing their own thing, and they're kind of competing for their grants and kind of competing to get their papers presented at this thing or that thing. And that's just basically how the game's been played for decades, and what our focus has been on trying to drive more collaboration and doing grants that really require institutions to work together and make joint proposals. So more of that encourages more of that collaboration and synergy and leverage, with the recognition that the big, bold breakthroughs in almost anything are going to come from insights that only happen if you broaden your thinking and broaden your perspective and have more people kind of at the table in that discussion. So driving more of that collaboration, I think, is critical, and it's really a missed opportunity in most places.
What about, this is something that I have never asked the question, so you guys get to be the guinea pigs. But with the Giving Pledge, have you guys, because so often what I see is, I'm philanthropist X and I'm going to do this. And so philanthropist Y may think it's a good idea, but philanthropist X is doing this.
I'm really glad you asked this question because, I was
have you guys
actually
talked about,
we have.
as a group, maybe getting together, because you all have tremendous wealth, but if you pooled it, I mean, my calculator in my brain starts going crazy, right?
Right. Well, I think even long before we get to the Giving Pledge, and we will address the Giving Pledge specifically, I was going to say that we were really taken aback when we got involved in the foundation at the amount of competition in the nonprofit sector, and we thought it was unhealthy, that there wasn't even a strategic acknowledgement of when it's smart to work together. I think it's gotten better, actually. But what I'll then say is I was also taken aback that funders are as guilty, if not more so, of this than the nonprofits that they actually fund and complain about. And so, one of the areas I'm really encouraged by,
See why I like her?
even before the Giving Pledge, is that I think in the last couple of years, I've really, really been excited by the amount of interest there's been among the funding community in sharing stories, oh my gosh, maybe even acknowledging mistakes, okay? And, trying to go forward together. And I think, both of us felt with the Giving Pledge opportunity that one of the things that really jazzed us about it was the opportunity to compare notes, learn from each other, have maybe some collaborations. And Stephanie, I don't know if there will be shared investment collaborations, philanthropically, but I don't think there will need to be for this to be a beneficial thing, that people who are seriously looking at the world and saying in a very humble fashion, how can we possibly take our resources and try to make a difference here? We will learn from each other, and that will be really, really positive. I mean, before any two funders go together on anything, good things will come of that.
And I think it was actually the main reason we committed to the Giving Pledge. We were intending to give away the majority of our wealth anyway, but we believed that doing it in a public way might motivate others, and more importantly, getting people together to share lessons learned. And as Jean said, more lessons learned from failures and successes would end up everybody being smarter, and therefore those resources being invested in a wiser way. And the reality is, and I know it's sometimes seems odd to people, it's really hard to give away money in a responsible, thoughtful, sustainable way. It's much harder than people think. So some of it is trial and error and adjusting your strategies over time, but a lot of it is learning from other people and trying not to, you can make new mistakes, but better not to make the same mistakes other people made. Where possible. So I think there is an opportunity for that. But the other piece of it, and Jean's probably right, I'm not sure there'll be, there might be informal people who meet there and are interested in a particular area and decide to work together in some fashion. I suspect there'll be some. I don't think there'll be any organized effort, because then it becomes a different kind of agenda. And it's almost like I'm trying to recruit you to my cause, and you're contributing. And then it kind of changes the dynamic in a way that's probably not healthy. But the other thing I would say about that, because it's something Bill Gates said when he was, he and Warren and Melinda were getting this going, is there also the recognition, even the Gates Foundation, which is a pretty big foundation, can only do so much, and the amount they spend is less than 1% of what the government spends.
Right.
So, so what maybe part of what they should be doing is trying, which is what they're doing now in education. They are doing a lot of things in education, but they're also trying to influence education policy, because that's where the big dollars are. And so there's a recognition and engaging with all these things. There's a role for business to play, as we've talked about, in terms of particularly entrepreneurial businesses, and there's a role for philanthropy directly to play. But there's also a role for the government to play, and maybe playing some role influencing how they're making their decisions and how they're setting their priorities can have more positive impact than anything any individual group can do themselves. But the key, I think, is for us, and we recognize we have a blessed with the luxury of doing it, being able to do more things than some people can. We understand that. Is how do you blur these lines and try to have impact in all these things, as opposed to the classic cases, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We want to use the whole toolbox.
Right, right. That's interesting. Is there another Twitter question? We got one?
Or questions
Or
here?
question here. Even better. Live people.
All right, there you go.
Michael.
Find myself wondering about two things. As funders, what's the biggest mistake you've made? And for those of us in the room running nonprofits, what's the biggest mistake we make?
Take that.
I can offer up a point of view. I think as funders, the biggest mistake we made was, and it really is two different things, but I'll try to blend it into one answer.
Hopefully your answer will not be national conference.
That was the
That
best.
was indeed.
The best,
Our
right
big-
there. Still feeling it. No, I think, when we started the foundation, I think, and there's just no other way to say it without it sounding arrogant, but I sure hope we weren't arrogant. We thought, because we had this successful business that we had built, that it would be easy to have success in philanthropy. And we were wrong. It's much harder. Much harder. As Steve just said, it isn't that, of course you can write a lot of checks, of course you can show up a lot, but to sit back and say that, that really big question, how do we view return on investment, and were we smart? And I think we had to learn, you know what, we're on a major curve here, and we're newbies, and we can learn from others. And so I think that was probably the biggest lesson we learned, and thankfully a pretty early one.
The other piece of that I'd say is we always struggle with a desire to have big impact quickly. We just do. we like step up the plate and hit a home run. That's what we like to do. We like to hit home runs. But sometimes you strike out. Babe Ruth was the home run king. He's also the strikeout king. And so part of it is recognizing there's inherent risk in this, and not everything can be successful. But part of it is trying to strike the right balance between saying you really do want to have the best, most significant impact as quickly as possible, but do it in a smart and sustainable kind of way. And sometimes that requires a little more patience, and almost always it requires more of an alliance strategy, because the easy way to do it is just do it yourself. And so balancing the desire to have the longer term sustainable impact, but basically recognizing it will take longer, and you'll have you have to deal with it. There's a Kenyan proverb. I don't know exactly how it goes. Somebody here probably knows it. But if it's essentially, if you want something done quickly, do it yourself. If you want it done sustainably and a broader impact, do it with others. And that is true. And so some of the things we've done, we said, it was really something we really feel passionate about. We really want to make happen. Let's go do it. And to the extent we do too much ourselves, it ends up making it less interesting to other people. It's our thing, not our thing, collectively. And sometimes we also then will push to get more stuff done more quickly than proves to be wise. And so it's a balancing act. We don't want to just say, well, we're kind of interested. We don't really care how long it takes. We're in this, we're totally patient. That's one extreme. But the other extreme is pushing too quickly for results too quickly, and often forcing execution of things would prove not to be optimal, or by doing that unintentionally, but having people feel like it's your thing and not a collective thing. So it's a balancing act, and it really is more of a bias towards sustainable impact, even if it means foregoing some short-term progress.
Nonprofits? Probably, I think, not enough emphasis on business models that are sustainable in scale. The brain cancer example that Steve gave you, it's an orphan cancer. Somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people a year get brain cancer. But there are over 120 brain cancer organizations in the United States. And that's just not smart. you know, so some of that goes to this whole issue of competition and, you know, but really, I think if they challenged themselves and said, what's our sustainable business model? What's our niche in the market, if you will, that we're going to serve? There wouldn't be 120 brain cancer organizations. And, you know, we love these organizations. They're great people. They have great intentions. But at the end of the day, they don't necessarily have business models that can be sustained or scaled for impact.
And the other piece of that, Tom's was an example of this blended business model. But I think most organizations are just way too reliant on next year's donations. And that's really the bias, and they organize everything around that. To the extent you're able to, I understand not everybody is, build in something that creates a sustainable revenue stream, that's way better. A good example, Gene's on the board of National Geographic. They started over 100 years ago with the idea of really educating people about the world, but they were smart enough to create a business model around joining the National Geographic Society and getting a magazine, and over time they've got a cable channel and all kinds of other stuff. And it's a huge business. And there's two things that are good about that. One is it is a sustainable business model. They actually have very little philanthropic giving. That's one area they're trying to focus on. The business really is the core. But the other is they have way more impact than they otherwise would have had.
They do.
The reason that these businesses allow them to have much broader reach and have built a much bigger brand than if they just said we're going to, have our annual, dinner in Washington D.C. for people to come to support the National Geographic Society, and they would have had this kind of impact because they reinvented themselves essentially as a business masquerading as with this broader. Not masquerading is too strong, but having this broader purpose.
They're not masquerading.
That really has enabled them to have a much broader impact. And now they then take some of the profits, and they do have some things with schools and other kinds of programs. So if to the extent it's possible to build that in, so there really is an ongoing recurring revenue business that's essentially throwing off cash that you can invest in as opposed to just relying on donations, that's obviously much better.
And if I can just interject quickly, the billion plus change that John Bridgeland mentioned when he did our introduction is being restarted. The first $500 million was raised, and we're going to finish that $1 billion in pro bono commitments by the corporate sector to nonprofits. The reason this is important is they're in 5 critical talent areas that go directly to scaling and sustaining a business model. So if you're in this room this morning, if you're watching the stream, if you hear about this, and you're a nonprofit, sort of help is on the way. I mean, we really do want to deploy these corporate assets to basically help great nonprofits scale and sustain themselves. But they need talent, really, in some cases that doesn't exist within the nonprofit today, and the corporate sector has been generous in the past, and we're counting on them being generous in the future to step up and to say, we'll bring those talents to you to help you in this way.
Thank you. Is there, okay, how about, can you stand up and yell?
I don't want to get you into a political conversation, but...
Then don't.
Then I think we're out of time.
Yeah, with respect to proposals that would eliminate or restrict the charitable deduction to nonprofits, I mean, what do you think the impact of that would be on charitable giving and on the philanthropic world?
Not helpful. But I think there's obviously, and Harris, who's in the Senate, understands these issues better than we do. But there's a whole swirl around policy in Washington that will continue for some period of time, with a growing concern, I think, appropriately around the deficit, and how do you figure out how to get the country on a sustainable fiscal path, which is going to result in having to spend less on things, and it's going to result in having to figure out other ways to generate revenues. And the debate is going to essentially be framed, I think, over do you lower the basic rates but get rid of sort of all the extra benefits, the loopholes, and so forth. And they're huge, not just charity one, but things related to mortgage interest and so forth. And I don't know how that's going to come out, but one way or another, we do need to kind of figure out a way to kind of match up our revenues and expenses as a nation a little more. And there's going to be some tough decisions, but clearly that would be one that would make it more difficult for many nonprofit organizations.
Hi, I'm Krista Kohlhausen. I'm with the Annenberg Presidential Learning Center at the Reagan Foundation, and I want to thank you both for what you've done. And I would love to hear, on a positive note, one of your best home runs or shining moments, biggest smiles from something from your funding story with youth and civic engagement.
Youth and civic engagement? Well, we have a lot of them. It's like picking your favorite child. It really is. So the first initiative that was major for the Case Foundation was in partnership with the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Mm-hmm. The digital divide was a very real issue at that time. I'm not saying it's gone away, but it's improved dramatically in the last decade. But we had a nation of young people totally unprepared and unequipped for the digital revolution that was coming forward. And so there was a coalition that we worked to pull together that put technology centers in 1,000 after-school centers in low-income communities around the United States. And I want to give tremendous credit to all of our partners who did this. So, but from our experience in working in that partnership and through that initiative, that was really cool to see, because it was a great collaboration, again, of the public sector. The Department of Education was part of that, of nonprofits. We had the Boys and Girls Clubs, we had YMCA, we had the Urban League. We had a number of different nonprofits, community centers across the nations, churches, schools, et cetera, that previously didn't have any access to the internet and no computer equipment. Gateway Computers, HP, Cisco, America Online, Case Foundation. It was truly a great early experience to teach us the power of collaboration, and at the end of the day, how you can look at outcomes and say, you know, did you hit the mark or didn't you? And Michael Smith is smiling because he was a key part of making that initiative happen. So. And
the other piece, which it goes back to this issue of viewing this world through a more integrated prism as opposed to these different silos. I'd answer the question. I think back on all the different things we've done, the one that's had the biggest social impact was AOL, because it really empowered people, got the whole medium going, got America Online, and the ripple effect across society has been, I think, profound. And so that playing, not just us, but the team we had 25 years ago that got that going and really made the internet part of everyday life, that probably is still our most lasting legacy, even though we've done a bunch of cool things since, and hopefully we'll do some more cool things in the future.
Hey.
Thanks. My name's Jake. Sorry, I thought there maybe was a groan because I'm asking another question. I'm from rural Tennessee. So, thank you.
Here's the guy.
You guys were here earlier. It's a whole inside joke.
Yes.
That's all right.
That's right. So, Gene, you spoke earlier about the fact that there's 120 organizations with brain cancer, and I think you've been in meetings in y'all's offices about the fact that there's just too many nonprofits, about 1.6 million registered C3s in the country at this point. And I think there's just been years and years of debate around this issue, and yet there really hasn't been any movement. In fact, we're only getting more nonprofits. And I got to say, I think, Steve, if I'm not wrong, you've led one of the biggest mergers in U.S. history. Right, with AOL Time Warner.
Can we go back to the politics?
Now, I have to wonder, when we're thinking about incentives to get, let's 120 for 10,000 people. I mean, it's like 80 people per organization, right? I mean, clearly this is not the right path. And folks like you are the ones kind of leading the way with incentives potentially. Is there anything that you guys can do or other folks can be doing to make this actually be a problem that moves in the negative direction in terms of numbers?
Sure, and I think all of you can have an impact as well. I think I've sat on boards where, I've advocated for mergers. I think mergers and acquisitions.
Points of Light.
That's right, Points of Light and hands-on. And there are some other organizations, in the nonprofit sector where we've seen some mergers take place. But I think there's not enough mergers and acquisitions kind of activity in the sector. And if you sit on a board, if you're running an organization, look over you, look below you, look to your right, look to your left, and say, is there a better way that we can all go faster, faster, sorry. And I think often there is. And so I do think that if more board members and more of the management team and leaders took that really seriously and really asked how do we scale the fastest and sustain ourselves most securely, chances are there's an opportunity for a merger, or I know acquisition's a funny word in the nonprofit sector, but you know what I mean. Yeah, it does happen. Prevention? Yeah. Well, and that's actually a dilemma we faced because, you know, we saw what was going on. We formed one. Hey, we might have been number 120. I don't know. But what we saw and what we looked at was we didn't see anybody pushing for collaboration in the sector. So in a weird way, we created an organization to bring collaboration, right? No, I do think some good old prevention could be used, and to funders who are, you know, in the room or part of this conversation, it's a question you can ask. Is this organization needed as new things are, you know, is there someone else that can serve this role, and maybe we bring new talent into that existing organization?
I'd say with your fun little Time Warner question, the way I would respond to that is there's a difference in terms of mergers when the companies have significant scale, and there are all kinds of cultural issues. And actually, when companies get to a certain scale, they kind of shift from being entrepreneurial attackers to more corporate defenders, and that's a very different mentality. Most of the companies we've been involved in have grown through acquisition, because Zipcar, for example, we actually were the largest investor in a competitor called FlexCar and put them together to become a major shareholder and our largest shareholder in Zipcar. Companies like Living Social have grown dramatically, particularly outside the United States, through acquisition. So the acquisition as a way to get more scale and have more impact and drive some synergies is extremely important. But you have to really have the right vision and the right people aligned around the right kind of things. That said, you know, one of the things we're advocating for is more startups in the country. That there's a lot of energy and passion that comes from startups. So saying we shouldn't do new ones is a little strong. Saying if you're doing a new one, just like doing a new company, if you basically say I'm going to start a new company to do something that 120 people are already doing and doing well, you're not going to be successful.
Right.
You know, you won't be able to attract the talent and attract the capital to do it, and because it's a dumb idea. Somebody's already doing that. Unless you have a better way to do it, it's not going to be successful. So looking at ways to get more scale and have more impact and a broader platform, I think is important. Recognizing there will be opportunities for innovation, and sometimes it does make sense to start something, but at least ask the question before you start it: is there some way to speed up what's there as opposed to start up what's already, you know, start up something from scratch? So it's not a kind of a one size fits all kind of answer. It really depends on the strategy, the team, the vision, the scale, the environment. There's lots of different things, but having more impact, even being here in the Constitution Center. The reason the United States has been, it's not without challenges, and we're certainly seeing that play out right now with a lot of difficult issues in Washington and different states. But the reason the United States is so powerful, it is the United States. There are 50 states are coming together, and the decision then is proven to be the correct one, which is 50 states working together have much more impact in the world and can drive much more of everything in terms of positive outcomes than if it really was 50 separate independent countries. And so that's a pure demonstration of the power of scale, but also the power of setting a clear agenda in terms of a Declaration of Independence and what have you, that really becomes a unifying document, going forward. So scale does matter, right? Because it does allow you to have maximize your impact, but it's not always the right answer.
Yeah, and I see Code for America is over here. Jen from Code for America. That's a brand new organization. We're invested in it. We are very, very excited about the work they're doing, where they're harnessing the talent, the engineering and developer talent around the United States to help our cities. No one was doing that, and if they were doing it, they were having no impact that we had known or heard of. So I think there are great examples of innovative new organizations coming around every day that we'll invest in and we'll champion. So Steve is so right. It's not about no new ones. It's just about stepping back and asking the hard question: is this really needed now?
Do we have one more time? Okay, one more back there.
Hi, Megan Hoot with Civic Enterprises. Thanks for your comments today. And I was struck by the joke that you made about, this sounds like something we would hear once we've already gone. And it just seems like such a great fortune that you are so young and you have so much time left to continue to contribute. And I was just wondering what's next.
Wow, she said we're young. How great does that feel?
But I was wondering what's next, and if you were Citizen of the Year again towards the end of your career, what else would you hope that you have accomplished in your time, and sort of what are your goals in this next phase?
Well, that's a tough question, but when you said that, it reminded me that I was, I think I was 31 years old, and in the what was in the internet industry was called the videotex industry, I got the Lifetime Achievement Award. That's a little premature there. It just shows you like the industry was pretty small. And it turned out, luckily, there was another good couple decades following that. Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. I think we constantly are reassessing in terms of the question I think we all ask are how do you have the best possible impact in the world and try to make a lasting contribution. And sometimes you do that obviously through family, and sometimes you do that through creating business, and sometimes you do that through philanthropy, sometimes you do that through government, like Harris did, through government service, sometimes you do that to serve in the military or being a teacher, or, there's a lot of different ways to do it, and it depends on what your passion is. And I think constantly reassessing what is the best way to have the maximum impact and making some adjustments, I think makes sense. One thing that I think is really been a dramatic shift in just 3 or 4 decades, and I think it will continue, is the model. Like my dad is a good example. He's basically worked for the same law firm for 60 years. And he had one career, law, worked for one company, that law firm. And when I came out of school in '80 and worked for this company for a couple of years, this company for a couple of years, he thought I was crazy. Like, like, what are you doing? But I think what we're starting to see now is not just that people are going to move around and do different companies or work for different nonprofits, but they're actually going to have different careers. I think the dynamic is going to be something like 10-year chapters, and for 10 years you do this, and maybe you do 2 or 3 things within this, and then for 10 years you do that, and then you do 2 or 3 things, and so a lifetime, obviously assuming you live until you're whatever, I think the current average age is 70 something, you actually have an opportunity to do like 5 different things, not just one, and do those things in a variety of different contexts. So I think constantly kind of reinventing yourself and what really drives you, what are the opportunities you see, what do you want to do, and not just assuming, to the extent you have the flexibility, and not everybody will, I understand that, but you can kind of ask the question, like, what is the next 10 years, and how do I want to craft that next story, next chapter, and not being just fixated on it's more of the same, because doing anything different is kind of risky and kind of uncomfortable, and that's fine. So I don't really know the simple answer to your question. 10 years from now or 20 years from now, what I'll be doing. Hopefully, it will be something that's interesting and you're passionate about, and you feel like you can have a broad impact. I frankly wouldn't be surprised if there was some similarity to some of the things I'm doing now, because the nice thing about things like what we do with the foundation or with Revolution is you have the ability to have an impact in a lot of different ways, working with a lot of different entrepreneurs or different executives in a lot of different companies, and that in itself is a way to kind of be reinventing yourself.
Well, thank you both. It's been fascinating and great. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to all of you, too.
Thank you.
I want to echo Stephanie's thanks to Jean and Steve for being with us, and I also want to thank Stephanie for moderating that thoughtful conversation, and also the fantastic remarks from Bridget Harris. It was really a the perfect thoughtful way to end what's been an amazing day. And we started the day with David Eisner very poignantly pointing out that this is a little bit like a family reunion. And I think I wanted to give a little bit of story about why I feel like this is a family reunion for me. When I started in the civic sector, I was a member of AmeriCorps, as David mentioned earlier, which was, charted the way by Harris Wofford. And at the time that I was in it, David Eisner was the CEO of CNCS. And through my opportunity to AmeriCorps, I got to serve on the planning committee of a conference called the International Conference on Faith and Service, which was convened by John Bridgeland and co-convened by NCOC and the Case Foundation. And I guess I might have done something right during the planning of that conference, because when it was over, the Case Foundation offered me a job. And so I went to work at the Case Foundation for a little while. And then through that, we invested in NCOC. And so when NCOC was experiencing its renaissance, thanks to, in a large part, Jean and Steve, it gave me the opportunity to take on a new role here. And so I do feel like, in a lot of ways, this really is a family reunion for me as I look around and think of a lot of my really cool aunts and uncles who have like invested in my leadership. No, you're not old. That's why it's the cool aunts and uncles, you know, that Megan pointed out, you're not old at all, that have really invested in my leadership over the years. And I'm also honored to be on the advisory board of the NGen initiative of Independent Sector, which thinks all about young nonprofit leaders. And one of the things every time we gather that people say is, this work is important, this NGen is important, because all of us sitting in this room have dedicated our lives to this work. And we are going to continue being together for the next 30 years of our career. And so as I look around the room and I see folks like, you know, some of my best friends who I've met through this work, Maya and David and Jake the contrarian from Tennessee, and Amy and Megan and everyone, it really does bring that family spirit of not only the civic sector, but the nonprofit sector as well. So I just want to end today by thanking you all for being a part of the civic family and for being a part of the NCOC family and for joining us today. So thank you all for being here. As I mentioned earlier, this is the launch of the 66th Annual National Conference on Citizenship, so there's still a lot of programming ahead of us. And I think there is really the opportunity to continue a lot of the conversations that we've started today on things like civility, on citizen-centered civic engagement, on what some of these stories really look like in communities. This is, as I mentioned earlier, the first time that NCOC has taken our conference outside of Washington. And one of the reasons that we decided to do that was because we felt like we were having these really great discussions and we were generating a lot of interesting conversation, but we always get to that point in the conversation inevitably where we say, but what does this actually look like and what does it really mean? And so we decided that we wanted to walk the walk of the talk that we were talking, and we wanted to go in a community and say, this is what it looks like. And so we are going to Arizona next week on September 22nd and 23rd. We hope you will join us. If you can't get on a plane and join us, we hope you will participate online, same bat time, same bat channel, ncoc.net/live, and continue a lot of these conversations there. We are joined by the Center for the Future of Arizona, who's just doing a lot of exemplary work in this area, and so they really are the civic innovators that we have been talking about a lot today. And so I hope you will join us for that conversation. And with that, I will, on behalf of NCOC, our staff, our board, the convening partners of the Case Foundation and Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, thank you for being here today. And I adjourn the Civic Innovators Forum and wish safe travels to all. Well done.